The air in the cavernous living room was thick with the smell of old money and something I hadn't smelled in years, my father's cheap cologne. He was leaning back in Grandpa's leather armchair, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. You understand, of course, that this arrangement is strictly temporary. He gestured vaguely towards the antique grandfather clock that had stood sentinel over my childhood, its chimes marking the slow, steady rhythm of a life he'd never participated in. Your presence here is a courtesy. A brief interlude before the final disposition of things. I just nodded, my gaze fixed on the ornate carving of a dragon on the armrest. It was a familiar detail, a silent witness to countless family dinners and hushed arguments. For as long as I could remember, my life had been an exercise in contained chaos. My mother was a phantom, drifting in and out of my awareness like a fragile butterfly, her affections as unpredictable as the weather. My father was a storm cloud, his temper a constant threat, his presence more of an imposition than a comfort. They were architects of my unease, their neglect a slow, steady erosion of any sense of security. This house, however, was my sanctuary. Grandpa, bless his quiet, stoic soul, had built a fortress of stability for me within these walls. He was the anchor in their tempest. There was the summer of the scorched earth, for instance. I was 7, maybe 8. My parents had decided, on a whim, to teach me responsibility by assigning me the care of their sprawling, overgrown garden. They presented it like a grand adventure, a noble pursuit. The reality was a patch of weeds taller than I was, a rusty trowel, and the vague threat that if this isn't done properly, there will be consequences. My father, of course, was nowhere to be seen when the sun beat down mercilessly and the thorns dug into my small hands. My mother, when I finally found her locked in her room with a half-empty bottle of wine, just waved a dismissive hand. Oh, just get it done, dear. Your father will be furious if it's not perfect. The garden remained a tangled mess, and the consequences never materialized, replaced instead by a chilling silence that spoke volumes. Then there was the incident with my birthday. I turned 9, a milestone I'd anticipated with a child's simple hope. I'd saved up my allowance for months, dreaming of a particular set of art supplies from the little shop downtown. My parents, however, had forgotten. Not just forgotten to buy a gift, but forgotten the day itself. It was Grandpa who remembered. He arrived unannounced that evening, a small, neatly wrapped box in his hands. Inside were the very paints I'd longed for, and a card that simply read, "To my bright star. Love, Grandpa." My parents, when they finally surfaced, offered a mumbled apology, their eyes already scanning the room for an escape. They never acknowledged the gift or the omission. The weight of their indifference settled on me like a shroud. It was during those years, while they flitted in and out of my life like careless guests, that I learned to build walls. Strong, silent walls. And then came the day Grandpa's lawyer called. I was living in the house, of course, a permanent fixture after my parents' final, spectacular implosion. Grandpa had left me everything, a legacy of love and quiet provision. My parents, estranged and desperate, had reappeared like vultures circling carrion. They'd styled themselves as victims, wronged by Grandpa's will. They were convinced they were entitled to their fair share, their definition of fair being a bottomless pit of entitlement. They paraded their newfound piety, their talk of family and reunification, a calculated performance designed to extract what they believed was theirs. The lawyer, a stern woman with eyes that missed nothing, sat across from me in her meticulously organized office. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. She cleared her throat, her voice calm but with an underlying steel. Your parents, she began, her gaze steady, have been informed of the terms of the settlement. Specifically, paragraph 7, subsection B, regarding the irrevocable trust established for your benefit. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. They have been made aware that any attempt to challenge the will, or to coerce you into relinquishing any part of your inheritance, would be in direct violation of the stipulated conditions. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. And that violation would trigger an immediate and permanent forfeiture of any potential claim they might have had, now or in the future. Furthermore, it would grant me the authority to pursue legal action for defamation and harassment, using the entirety of the estate's legal fund to ensure their voices are silenced, definitively. I didn't react immediately. I sat there, the hum of the city a distant thrum, ticking of the clock on her wall a steady drumbeat. I looked at the polished surface of her desk, the neatly stacked files. I pictured my father's blustering demands, my mother's tearful manipulations. I saw the smug self-assurance on their faces as they'd planned their attack. And in that moment, a profound stillness descended upon me. There was no anger, no surge of righteous fury. Just a quiet, dawning understanding. Grandpa, in his infinite wisdom, had foreseen this. He had armed me, not with weapons, but with documents, with legalities, with the very structure of the system they so casually disrespected. I remembered my father's final, indignant phone call, just days before the lawyer's summons. He'd been screaming, his voice cracking with a manufactured outrage. "You ungrateful little brat. After everything we've done for you. You think you can just hoard Grandpa's money? We'll see about that. I'll make sure everyone knows what a heartless manipulator you are." He'd spat the words, convinced of his power, of his ability to paint me as the villain. He'd threatened to drag our family name through the mud, to expose every perceived flaw, every past hurt. He'd believed, with every fiber of his being, that his rage was a potent weapon. The lawyer had mailed me a copy of the trust documents. I'd read them carefully, absorbing every clause, every legal nuance. I'd marked the specific passages that my parents, in their arrogance, had overlooked or underestimated. The lawyer had confirmed my understanding. It was a blueprint for their own undoing, meticulously crafted by Grandpa to protect me from the very wolves who were now circling. My father's final message to me, a torrent of expletives and accusations, arrived while I was sitting on the patio, a cup of lukewarm tea in my hands. His words were a digital echo of his verbal tirade, threats of legal battles, accusations of greed, pronouncements of my moral bankruptcy. He was still convinced he held the upper hand, that his bluster would win. He didn't understand that the game had already changed. I stood up, walked inside, and sat at the antique oak desk in Grandpa's study. The scent of aged paper and lemon polish filled the air. I opened my laptop, a simple, functional machine, and navigated to my email. I didn't draft a long, impassioned plea or a furious retort. Instead, I opened a new message. The recipient was my father. The subject line was terse, settlement confirmation. I attached a single PDF document. It was a scanned copy of the settlement agreement, meticulously prepared by Grandpa's lawyer. I highlighted the clauses that specifically addressed the consequences of challenging the will. There was no preamble, no explanation, no apology. Just the stark, cold, legal reality of their actions. Then, I wrote a single sentence. As per the attached, any further communication will be considered a violation of the agreement, and legal action will commence immediately. I added the lawyer's contact information below. I hit send. A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice, usually so practiced in its performance of distress, was shrill with panic. "What did you do? What have you sent him? He's absolutely beside himself." I didn't answer. I just listened, the sound of her escalating fear a quiet satisfaction. Then, the text started. A flurry of messages from various cousins, aunts, and uncles, the usual constellation of familial informants and self-appointed mediators. Your father is devastated. Your mother is distraught. Why are you doing this to your family? Can't we all just talk? I ignored them all. I put my phone on silent and walked back out to the patio. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 7 times, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the house. It was the sound of finality. I watched as my father's car, a hulking black SUV, sped away from the house, its taillights disappearing down the long driveway. He hadn't even tried to confront me in person. He'd received his silent decree, and he'd fled. The following weeks were a study in their desperation. The texts became more frequent, more frantic. My father, emboldened by a desperate courage, attempted a legal Hail Mary, a nonsensical claim that I'd somehow coerced Grandpa. The lawyer's response was swift and brutal. A cease and desist, followed by a scathing court filing that detailed their pattern of harassment and entitlement, backed by irrefutable evidence. The legal fund Grandpa had so thoughtfully provided was deployed with chilling efficiency. Their lawyer, a slick operator who clearly knew he was fighting a losing battle, advised them to concede. I saw snippets of their downfall on social media, carefully curated by mutual acquaintances. My father, once a booming presence, appeared diminished, his pronouncements replaced by vague complaints about unfair systems. My mother, her carefully constructed facade crumbling, looked perpetually tired, her online presence a ghost of its former self. The social consequences were as satisfying as the legal ones. Their reputation, meticulously crafted over years of self-importance, had evaporated. They were no longer the influential, wronged figures they'd tried to portray. They were simply pariahs, their greed and entitlement laid bare for all to see. The quiet execution. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about reclaiming the stolen peace, about silencing the toxic noise that had defined my childhood. It was about Grandpa's legacy, not just the financial one, but the enduring strength of his love, a love that had prepared me for this moment, a love that had ensured their thunderous pronouncements would ultimately fall on deaf ears. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever known.